Hi everyone, and thanks for joining our webinar. Today is all about omnichannel campaigns, and we'll be discussing how and why programmatic digital out-of-home should be included and discussing the benefits of doing so. A quick intro from me. I'm Layla from VIOOH. I work with DSPs across EMEA and APAC, and I'll be your moderator today. VIOOH is an SSP connecting DSPs to premium digital out-of-home inventory globally, and we're currently present in 17 markets worldwide. Before we start, there's a few housekeeping items. So the session is being recorded, and there is a Q&A function through which you can submit your questions throughout the session, and we'll be going through these at the end. Now I will hand over to our lovely panel to introduce themselves. Patricia?
Yes, so hi everyone, I'm Patricia. I'm the Partnerships Director here at VIOOH, working with media owners such as JCDecaux to help them unlock their programmatic offering.
Hi everyone, I'm Philippa. I work at JCDecaux. I'm the Associate Director of Programmatic, and we work with VIOOH as our SSP partner.
Hi there, I'm Shanil, Commercial Director of VIOOH UK. If you're unfamiliar with VIOOH, we are a cookieless omni-channel platform. My role is kind of working with agencies and brands on one side, so kind of making sure that they get the most from our products and our service, making sure that we drive commercially efficient performance and outcomes for the brands that we work with. And on the flip side, working closely with our data, tech and supply partners, so JCDecaux and VIOOH, to make sure that we're partnering as effectively as we can to bring innovation to the market in everything we do.
Thank you. Okay, so diving in with our first question. So if we start with a strong one, what are the benefits to advertisers of including programmatic digital out-of-home as part of a multi-channel campaign, and why should it be included? I'm going to go to Shanil first.
Sure. So I think there's lots of benefits to, including digital out-of-home within an omnichannel buy. It's a fantastic reach driver, number one. So as a one-to-many medium, it means that one ad can reach many people at the same time. So for that upper funnel kind of priming kind of metric, I think it's fantastic for that. It's also a premium and brand safe environment. It's been a mainstay in media planners kind of activations for a long time. So I think as a market, we really understand what out-of-home achieves when it is being used as part of a plan. But obviously programmatic is kind of challenging and kind of driving that forward quite a lot at the moment. It also ties really well with other channels. So again, technology is kind of facilitating this environment where we can really push what we're doing on out-of-home forward through kind of data, through measurement, through attribution, and it also allows us to tie with the channels that we offer through VIOOH. So, mobile being a really good one, but yes, definitely ties well with other channels that we're activating through our platform at the moment. And it also is being activated more seamlessly through the advent of technology as well. So there's lots of different benefits to activating out of home, but definitely, like I said, technology is kind of driving that forward and unlocking new capabilities across the market as well.
I think we'll also touch on this further down the line, showing that part of a multi-channel campaign, digital out-of-home can be a good reach extension on a campaign and benefit. Philippa?
So I guess there's a couple of points that immediately stick out to me. Firstly, adding a new channel is the addition of new data points and insight straight away. And then secondly, I guess more relevant to out-of-home specifically, it's a trusted medium. Like you said, research has shown that 58% of people actually see out-of-home as a more relevant and trustworthy platform than any others. And I think it's the thought process of you can't tell lies in public. So brands can use out-of-home to bolster their image and perception with the public, and then they can focus on getting engagement and interaction with brand through private screen medias.
And Patricia, from a viewpoint of view?
I think from my point of view, it's definitely ease of access. I think Shanil touched on it a bit. Marketeers and brands have now more flexibility than ever before to optimize cross-channel, cross-campaign, and move budgets from what's working to from what's not working to what's actually working. So I think that's really the main thing that programmatic for out-of-home unlocks in the multi-channel conversation.
Definitely, and I think the way that it's traded as well. So when we think about out of home itself, it's not traded in the same way that other programmatic channels are traded. So it's not done through the open exchange. It's not kind of what that legacy kind of almost dirty word of programmatic when it first started came around, a race to the bottom in terms of accessing inventory. We're not talking about programmatic out of home in that way. So I think the benefit of activating digital out of home as part of programmatic buy is the fact that you can access that inventory in those premium environments at a specific floor rate and guarantee the fact that you are going to appear in those environments. And I think that when we think about the benefits of activating programmatic and kind of bringing it into that out of home space, that's another really key one. The fact that it's traded in the way that it is really, really important to kind of getting that confidence into the market as to how out of home is currently being traded.
Yeah, and I think from my point of view, I also see out of home into almost like the connection between the real world and the digital world. If that makes sense when you put it in the context of the multi-channel. So it's quite interesting to see it like that.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a key point I always say. When you're out of home, although it's a digital ad, you're in a completely different frame of mind when you're sitting in your house looking at your phone or your computer. So the next question is quite a good segue, which is, what other channels does programmatic out of home work particularly well with? And I'm going to go to Philippa first for this one.
Well, I think we already know that mobile and digital out of home work well together. We work with VIOOH and other omni-channel DSPs all the time on multi-channel campaigns like that. But I guess thinking a little bit more outside the box, CTV and radio, perhaps, I see as channels that we could work well with. With CTV, you've obviously got consumers outdoors seeing the digital out of home ads, and then they go inside, flick on their TVs and start streaming, and they see another ad for that same brand with a consistent message. So I think there's definitely a connection there. And similarly with radio, because you've got people listening to radio at home, they might then go outside and start driving around the city. They'll still hear those ads on the radio, but then they'll also be exposed to digital out of home ads as well. And it's all about creating a synergy between channels. So I'd actually be quite reluctant to say there are any channels that we couldn't work well with, but those are the sort of two examples that I've got top of mind.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And Shanil, being like actually having worked across campaigns that have used these different channels, what would you say works well?
Yeah, totally agree with Philippa. I think that mobile and out of home obviously go really, really well together. You can use mobile data to activate digital out of home, but you can also retarget users that you know have been in a specific vicinity of an out of home ad on their mobile devices. So those two are really, really nice complementary channels together. They're both also channels whereby location can also be context. So when we think about context and where users are, they're both channels that kind of tie into that location narrative. So historically, they've worked very, very well together. But likewise, like Philippa was saying, I don't think that we need to limit ourselves when we come to think about what channels out of home can work well with. I think that, all of the channels that we operate through VIOOH, certainly we have seen tied together with out of home. So whether it's CTV, the fact that, those are both one to many mediums. So there's a lot of kind of similarities when it comes to the way that those channels are activated. The fact that they are more upper funnel channels, but they tie really nicely together. You can use the same data across them. So we partner with a company called Starrise Intelligence, for example, for data, telco data that we can activate across both of those channels. So I think CTV is a really, really nice complementary channel to digital out of home for the reasons that we just said. Audio, 80% of audio streaming happens on a mobile device these days, or digital audio streaming happens on a mobile device. So again, you can kind of retarget users that have seen an out of home ad on Spotify, SoundCloud, Deezer, etc., etc. So I think that digital audio is another way that we can kind of tie those different channels together using that same currency of data. And we're really starting to see the rise of in-game as well, and kind of the metaverse and all of these kinds of ideas that are starting to creep into the ecosystem. And I think in-game is very similar to CTV. You can use that same data across in-game that you can on CTV and out of home. So if we're thinking about channels that go together, I think, obviously mobile and out of home do go very, very well together, but there's no need to limit thinking of just those two channels working nicely together. The ecosystem in itself ties very nicely together. If we think about a user journey and the way that we consume media, we don't consume just mobile and digital out of home together, right? When we're, throughout the course of our day, we're seeing multiple touch points, and we as marketeers need to kind of boil that down. And now that we have the technology to be able to target users across those various channels, think about the way that we're tying together, because they all exhibit slightly different traits and they can be tied together, but they still are standalone channels in their own rights as well. Yeah. So it's important to think of them as being unified, but also remember the nuances between them when we're coming to activating as well.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we need to always remember is that programmatic digital out of home is an emerging channel alongside other channels like in-game. So like it's a testing process and seeing what works well together, but more instances than not, like everything does complement each other quite well.
Definitely.
And another key point which we'll probably address again is context and the importance of that going into a company's future. Patricia, did you?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna touch on the same thing actually, Layla, that you said there. It's very much a test and learn approach. It depends on the brand side of things, what the path to purchase looks like. That's unique for every brand and the brand story and the message you're trying to convey, right? So there's not really an off-the-shelf approach like this is the solution that's gonna work for everyone. It's very much a test and learn approach. How do I want to tell my story? How do I want to sit in front of users and get that message across? So now you have, like I said at the beginning, the flexibility of playing with different channels and optimizing accordingly.
Yeah, Layla, I think the point that you made there is really important. We're at the beginning of this journey, right? So programmatic out of home is a new way of activating out of home. So we have some of the answers, but we don't have all of them yet. And technology is definitely facilitating and moving that forward. And we're kind of figuring out as we go along as an industry. So I think that's a really, really key point as well. By no means are we saying that we have all the answers on how these different channels tie together, but we're certainly in a point at the moment where we have enough information where we can start to do that. And that's only going to become more and more efficient as we move through. So
Shanil, from a Hawk point of view, how are you measuring digital out of home alongside other digital channels? Measurement's a really strong subject, and I think measurement in digital out of home is still a test and learn process.
Definitely.
But I'd be interested to know from your point of view.
yeah, definitely. I mean, we're really lucky because we have the very smart people in Montpellier that build our platform have built out some very cool proprietary technology that we can use to quantify the success of our digital out of home campaigns, not just digital out of home, but also mobile audio, CTV, in-game, all of the different channels that we offer. So when we think about footfall, for example, kind of bringing that upper funnel into the lower funnel, when we think about conversions, driving footfall to store, retail campaigns, etc., we built a tool called In-Store Impact, which basically allows us to quantify the effect of our out of home on store traffic, all in real time. So we can also do that across the various other channels that we offer as well. So that's one of the way that we're kind of quantifying the success of digital out of home for the brands that's relevant for. We've also built out our own proprietary brand lift product as well, which helps us to quantify the effects of all stages of the purchase funnel across all of the channels that we offer too. So that's available to agencies and brands to use via our platform. So a really good way to quantify the effect that all of those channels are having, both in isolation and when used together. So brand studies and footfall are kind of two of the proprietary tools that we have. Obviously, we use kind of the standard digital metrics, so impressions and those sorts of things. But I think it's a really fast-paced and evolving space when it comes to measurement. As channels become more and more digitized, there's more and more attribution that comes in. But I think we need to be careful to remember that out of home is very, very different to some of the other channels that we offer. So when we think about, we're frequently asked about how can I measure the reach of this campaign, for example, or how can I frequency cap on digital out of home specifically? And those kind of metrics just don't exist on digital out of home, right? You can't turn off an ad because a user has seen it 3 times, because if you're in the middle of what to do, that would be a nightmare. So I think it's important to remember that there are common denominators across all of those channels when we come to measurement, but it's also important to know that each of those channels will have their nuances when it comes to measurement too. So again, it's an evolving space, and it's something that we need to really kind of quantify and make sure that we don't kind of fall foul of what we have almost with digital display, which is there's so much data out there and there's so many different metrics working together, that actually you end up with, I think, Patricia, you said it last week, an analysis paralysis, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, what are you actually trying to measure? And I think that's really, really important to boil it back when you're planning a campaign. So, right, what am I trying to get my digital out of home to do? And let's focus on that rather than going, right, I want my digital out of home to do this, but I also want it to drive site traffic, and I want it to do football, and I want it to do this, right? It's about having that really core metric across all of the plan, having all of those channels working together. So, like I said, there's lots of measurement tools that we have in the platform, just like picking the right ones for digital out of home, I'd say.
Yeah, and I think it's obviously because it's still a new channel, it's an education piece, like because it's a display ad, people then just automatically assume the same display metrics will be okay, like frequency, for example.
Yes.
Definitely, but again, I mean, that probably segues into the next question, which is what do you think the challenges are for advertisers in including programmatic digital out of home in their campaigns if they're already trading programmatically across on other channels? And are there any specific barriers to entry that they may need to overcome? Philippa?
I mean, I think you've touched on a couple of points already. So I'll start with education, because I guess it's all about knowledge and education of the channel. Because like you say, programmatic and digital at home is still in its infancy. It's very new to the industry as a route to market. So there aren't a huge amount of people who know programmatic and out of home really well. So what we've done at JCDecaux is actually create a programmatic digital out of home guide for digital marketers to sort of help with that. And then more recently, we've partnered with TPA Digital and created a 3-module training zone for people. It's the fundamentals of programmatic digital out of home, but then also more generically the benefits of out of home as a channel for people who are completely new. So I think that's sort of the education and knowledge side of it, but then there is definitely the measurement side of things. So as Hawk have mentioned, they've got an incredible tool already. They've got various tools in their repertoire, but what we're seeing is potentially there's room for maneuver here. We need more tools, we need more standardization, and we need, I think, because a lot of people have this expectation that they can come to us and we can measure everything seamlessly cross channel, and it's really difficult because at JCDecaux we can't see that blend of publishers, we can't see the website visitors, we can't see the click-through rates, we can't see any of that. We don't have that data on our side. So my encouragement in terms of measurement would be for the buy side to just keep making waves, keep making waves in that area. We'll see the improvements. Like you say, it's in its infancy. We're going to see bigger and better things. And then us as media owners, we can focus on enhancing our own channel, whether that's including new data sets to enhance the buying strategies or other examples. I just think, yeah, keep measuring, keep focusing on measurement tools, and we'll see bigger and better things in the future.
Yeah, and I think again that goes back to the education, because as we've touched on before, traditional out of home teams and agencies maybe don't have enough programmatic experience, and that's where the confusion lies on who buys it, and then also the confusion lies on which metrics they're measuring against the programmatic digital out of home. Have you faced any of those conversations?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's a really interesting point about where out of home is being bought from. And I think that over the last 3 to 4 years, we've definitely as an industry started to iron that out. But when we were first launching our out of home offering, it took us a good couple of years to actually understand who we should be speaking to. And the various teams that we speak to kind of look for different things when they're looking at out of home, right? So traditional out of home teams have that great legacy knowledge of how out of home is traded, et cetera, et cetera. And on the flip side, you've got, you know, the programmatic teams that are really, really good at automation and kind of the data and the measurement and all of those sorts of things. And those two conversations are quite different conversations to have, right? So when we first launched, it took us a good couple of years to actually iron out within each agency who we should be speaking to, where it was being bought from. And it was almost kind of like the VOD paradox of like kind of 3-4 years ago, like are the TV teams buying it? Are the digital teams buying it? Is there a specific VOD team that's buying it? And we've almost seen that with the advent of programmatic out of home as well, right? Is it being activated from the trading desk? Is it being activated from the account teams? And the reality is, like, it's being activated really well from both of those different sources. But I think that the great thing about the way the agency model works is that agencies are able to pivot really, really quickly. And I think we've definitely seen that with the partners that we're working with in the last, like, let's say post-pandemic, right? Because during the pandemic, out of home was one of the channels that took the biggest hit. But post-pandemic, we've definitely seen agencies move really, really quickly to start to align their teams and start to iron that strategy out within their own teams themselves. I think that's really, really helped both us and the agencies to understand how digital out of home should be activated. So I think that it hasn't been a barrier, more of a speed bump. Basically, it's kind of delayed the adoption of digital out of home because there was confusion as to where it should be being bought from. But we're definitely at a point now within most of the agencies that we deal with, in fact, all of the agencies that we deal with, where there's a clear understanding of where that should be bought from, and that's really helping to push things forward. I think that you mentioned standardization there. I think that that's been a little bit of a barrier on our side. So even when we're trying to understand the way that out of home works, because out of home was a new channel to us, 3-4 years ago, so we're still figuring things out as well. And that's been one of the things that we've seen, the fact that the way that impressions are traded on VIOOH, for example, isn't the same way that it's traded on another SSP. The way that auction happens isn't the same as well. And that's not a major issue right now, but it is something that if we could have a little bit more standardization on, then I think it's something that would help the adoption a little bit more and help brands to understand exactly how out of home is being traded. And I think the creative process ties into that as well, because there's, various different formats, D6s aren't one standard size, even though we call them a D6, there's different sizes of D6s. The way that those creatives play out across different screens are different. So our lovely creative department, who build a lot of the creatives that we run, often have to build out multiple different formats for multiple different supply sources. So you go from building, 10 formats to suddenly building 40 formats if you have to run it across various screens and various suppliers, etc., etc. So I think it's something like we said, it's a new way of buying programmatic. We're asking, legacy media owners to kind of change the way that they're doing things, and it will take time, but a little bit more standardization will definitely help to drive the adoption and move that forward. And like I said, it's a new way of working, so I think that we are going to get there. But I think that a lot of the barriers that we first saw when we launched digital out of home, when it came to the adoption and the buying routes, a lot of those have been ironed out already. So it just shows as an industry how quickly we can move if there is something as compelling as programmatic out of home is. There's a need to buy it, there's a want to buy it, and we now have a way that we can move forward with agencies to do that. So that's what's really, really exciting about the next few years.
Yeah, I think the creative point is really interesting, because having that process or those formats standardized really enables ease of activation. So if someone does put a programmatic digital out of home on the plan, but read all the creative, plus it's the efficiency of having 40 pages across a campaign, like, is that going to get your message out there in the right way? Is it going to make the best use of your budget? And but that's the same with all new channels, isn't it? It's a learning process. Patricia, are there any other barriers to entry that you would like to?
Nothing that I would add on. I think I would summarize both of what Shanil and Philippa said. It's the good news is it's not a knowledge gap. It's more encouraging the knowledge sharing across teams, right? So the knowledge is there. It's more encouraging that. And that's what we're looking to do with webinar series such as this. All sides are present. And also on the standardization front, we work, for example, as VIOOH with the IAB in 2020 on their digital out of home glossary of terms to standardize terms and drive that effort forward. So I think it's really about that, and I'm very happy to hear how JCDecaux are approaching the educational front, and they're putting investment there, because that bolsters that effort as well.
Yeah, it's a key point. I think the knowledge and education has been growing for the last few years. I think if you'd asked me the same question 2 or 3 years ago, I would have said it's all just knowledge and education. There's not a lot else at the barrier to entry right now. But there is now there's a lot of education sources out there for digital out of home and the programmatic route to market. So I think as that part expands throughout the industry and more people get on board, we will see that need for education and knowledge fade slightly, and then we'll see the expansion ramp up.
Great, thank you. So my next question, contrary to the evolution of programmatic within digital display, which started off as remnant inventory, programmatic digital out of home is commanding a premium CPM versus buying directly in a non-programmatic way. What is it that programmatic is adding to the digital out of home offering that justifies the higher CPMs? Patricia, I'm going to go to you first on this one.
I think it kind of goes back to the advantages we were talking about in the kickoff question, right? It's very much about the flexibility, the ease of access, triggered-based creative activation. That's one of my favorite features for sure. And that's what really programmatic does for digital out of home. It brings to a multi-channel campaign. So I think these 3 key things that come to mind for me, but I don't know what Shanil maybe has.
Shanil being on the front line.
Yeah.
I mean, luckily we don't get that objection too often. We don't really hear buyers coming to us and say, well, these CPMs are much higher than what we might be paying through other routes. It is a question that we get sometimes, but I think there's a really clear understanding that programmatic really can enhance what we're doing when it comes to digital out-of-home buying. So it's the flexibility, it's the additional data, it's the measurement, it's the channels tying together, and all of these things are the things that really help us to understand why programmatic out-of-home should be priced as it is. And it is a premium environment, right? We're not talking about remnant inventory, we're talking about inventory that's in demand all of the time. And that's why, those different elements of what kind of commands that additional CPM. But like I said, it's not something that we've really come up as an objection against. I think that most buyers that we speak to, most agencies that we speak to, really understand the benefit of adding those additional levers onto their campaign. And I think it's also important to note that we're not saying that everything should be bought programmatically. My marketing team might have words for me after this, but not, yeah, exactly. But not everything needs to be bought programmatically, right? You can still buy a really, really successful digital out-of-home campaign without activating it programmatically. However, if you want additional data, if you want to use data to inform your buy, if you want to measure it in a certain way, if you want that flexibility of being able to optimize in real time, if you want various channels to be speaking together and tying together, then that's where the kind of real use case we see for programmatic out of home is. So we're by no means saying, take what you're doing on digital out of home, take what you're doing out of home and shift it all into programmatic, because that's not the right way to go, in my opinion. But I think that if your brief and if your brand kind of exhibits a certain characteristic and they want to activate with that data and kind of drill down, find that audience, buy more efficiently, buy more flexibly, and measure in specific ways, then that's where they should be buying programmatically. And that's where there's a real justification for the additional CPM.
And I think just connected to that, because when Shanil was speaking, I was actually sort of thinking about my experience in the travel world. And I think, it comes down to what the message you're trying to convey and what you're trying to get to the user, in front of the consumer, right? Yeah. If it's a seasonal offer that will be activated based on weather or temperature, programmatic is definitely the route to go. If it's an always-on activity, it might be better to go direct. So it really depends. Like, it's not just the channels; it's also the trading model that the marketers get played with. But again, it comes down to what is the business objective and what you're trying to drive.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important message. And yes, as someone in a programmatic role, also saying not everything should be bought programmatically, but there is a value in it. There's a value in this route to market. And if your brand is after some agility, flexibility, and creativity with the way they want to deliver and get those deliverable outcomes, then programmatic is the route forward. Because otherwise, out of home is it's purely broadcast medium. So that programmatic route to market offers all of that flexibility. And thinking about it from another point of view as well, we are offering our inventory now with no minimum spends, no fixed durations. We're allowing the buy side to make all of that decisioning, whether it's as simple as time, day, or location triggers, to adding in additional audience data, dynamic creative and activation. So I think now with the programmatic route to market, we're creating a contextually relevant point more than ever that hasn't been seen before in digital out of home. So I think that's where the value comes in.
Yeah, definitely. And so this actually is a good segue to my next question, which is, Philippa, I'll go to you first with this. What do you think the key points are to consider when including programmatic digital out as part of your multi-channel buying?
Well, I'm going to keep it quite fairly generic, I guess. It's don't treat programmatic digital out of home in the same way you would your other channels. Yeah. I think we've touched on it several times already. It's a broadcast medium. It's a one-to-many, which means there are nuances with the way you have to activate it. You can't treat it as person to person anymore. But we have those synergies with the private screen medias, which means our channel works as a complementary or a priming activation method. But be open to ideas. We're still in our infancy in this with programmatic digital out of home, and us as media owners, we know our inventory, we know our environments, we know what locations are going to work best. So be open to suggestions and ideas when you're briefing, because we've got the expertise from our side to make your campaign as good as it could possibly be. So listen to your DSP partners. They've got the data, they've got all of the references from previous campaigns that they've run, but also listen to your media owners, because we will get the best plan for you.
Yeah, perfect. And Chanel, what would you recommend?
I mean, I really couldn't agree more. And I think the point that Philippa raised there is a very, very good one. Kind of understand the role of the channel and what we're trying to do by adding digital out of home onto a plan. You know, we frequently get briefs where, you know, the best briefs we get are the ones where we go, where the brand and the agency says, recommend the channels that you see fit to achieve this specific KPI or this specific outcome. And I understand why we sometimes do get briefs to say, right, we want to run this on, you know, 20% on out of home, 20% on this, 20% on the other. And that's great. And we can definitely activate in that way. And there's definitely merit to doing that. But the flexibility and the agility between those channels is really, really key. And understanding what out of home is actually trying to achieve as being part of that plan is really, really important. So don't get to the end of the campaign and go, well, out of home drove, you know, 10% more or 10% less than the different channel, because they are different channels and they are going to perform in different ways. But by being able to have all of that data sitting in one platform, understanding with our proprietary tools, for example, you know, the lift that each of those channels has had and the effect that each of those channels has had, we can start to help to contextualize exactly how those channels should be used and why those channels should be used. So I think of them as being able to be unified through technologies like ours, but also remember that they are going to perform slightly differently and they are going to react slightly differently when they are on a plan. So remember those nuances when you're putting that plan together. And I think that's the key point when it comes to planning and activating digital out of home as part of like an omni-channel buy.
Yeah, and I think the key thing in planning, which I think we touched on last week, was sometimes to not overthink it and to just look from the consumer's point of view. Like if you're a consumer and you're looking for this product, where are you more likely to be targeted and you know, see an uplift in consideration or purchase, whatever the campaign goals are. Philippa, from a media owner's perspective, have you seen anything in the market that makes you excited about the prospect of out of home working with other digital channels?
Well, I think we've touched on it actually already. It's the collaboration that we're now seeing. I think now we've overcome the initial knowledge and education speed bump, as you mentioned earlier. I think that now we're seeing collaboration across the board from all different players who are using programmatic digital out of home to create some incredible case studies, which give us insight and knowledge even more. And then we're also seeing people starting to try and produce best practices and standardization as a bit of the norm. So I think there's bigger and better things to come for our route to market, our channel for definite. But I think it's if we can keep collaborating, we're going to see that needle move from just at the moment, which seems to be digital out of home and mobile work really well together, to mobile, CTV, digital out of home together, and then maybe incorporating some radio and other channels. So I think the best is yet to come, but the collaboration is the point that sticks to me at the moment, that we're just seeing a lot more of it. And I think with that comes expansion for the channel.
And I think in a pandemic world, CTV had a rise because everyone was inside, and now as everyone moves more out of home, that's where those two channels can really complement each other.
100%.
And we're seeing a higher drive for out of home. Okay, so this one's quite an interesting one as well, which is how is digital out of home future proof?
I think from my perspective, it's definitely the creativity behind it. If we take it down to its core, advertising, it's all about creativity and creating an emotional response from consumers to connect to your brand, right? And I think digital out of home really empowers that. As you mentioned, Layla, we're consumers ourselves. If we go downstairs right now and I see an ad for Athens 30 degrees, I will get my phone up talking about mobile and look for a flight to Athens for sure. So I think it's definitely that creativity in what message you're trying to get across what channels, how are you going to reach that objective, and how you piece that puzzle together to create that storytelling experience for your consumer. And then I think maybe going back to like a historical point of view, from a history buff, so I'll bring it into the conversation, is digital out of home has been around for thousands of years, right? If we think about how Egyptians or Romans would promote their laws or make announcements to an audience, would be through out of home, right? So I think those are the two key things that come to mind for me.
Chanel?
Well, I mean, we've made it 35 minutes without talking about cookies. We might as well start there, right? So, exactly. Yeah, sorry everyone, we had to mention at some point. So yes, obviously digital out of home as an environment has been cookieless since day one. So we're thinking about the changing privacy ecosystem. I think it's incredibly future-proof when it comes to that. All has been cookieless since day one as well. So that's why I think there's been a natural fit between what we've been doing and kind of the reasons to why we kind of branched into digital out of home. But it doesn't mean that you can't use data on out of home. I think there's lots of ways that you can use data, obviously through device IDs, the way that we do things. Or you can just use those API connections. And we're seeing more and more triggers coming to market as to how you can activate trigger-based buying on out of home without the need for any cookies at all. So the data isn't becoming any less rich. It's just becoming really future-proofed in the way that we can activate that data across digital out of home. So I think that that's a core reason as to why digital out of home is exceptionally future-proofed, is because it is privacy-proof as well. So where we're seeing those changes on other channels, we've kind of not seen them out of home. We can kind of go full steam ahead with that. I think the point on creativity is really, really important. That buys into that kind of API-based buying. So we're seeing more and more dynamic creative coming into the out-of-home market. So we're looking at various routes to activating this at the moment. But I think that kind of marriage of data and creativity coming together is really kind of boiled down exactly what we're trying to do with buying programmatic out of home. Make those relevant moments, make those connections, make those context-based buys. I think that DCO will definitely help us to do that and to do that in a big way. And we always talk about, as an industry and within org as well, we talk about personalization at scale, right? What better way to do that than using digital out of home DCO on the biggest reach driving channel that we have in the industry at the moment, which is out of home, and bringing that personalization to it. So I think that's what's really exciting, having this really traditional brand safe environment that's been used by media owners and media agencies for a long time, and having all of these programmatic levers that we have on the other side, so data, creativity, DCO, optimization. Those two worlds colliding is incredibly exciting, and I think that that's what's going to drive the industry forward. And also, all of this is completely future-proof. Going back to the original question.
Yeah, I think DCO is a real interesting subject because it can be really quite powerful in out of home. There are so many different ways that you can include dynamic creative in your out of home campaigns, and like a pollen count to a weather trigger and things like that. And in line with that sequential messaging, it's quite interesting advertising. Philippa, do you have any?
I completely agree with pretty much everything Shanil said just there, but I'm gonna focus on the cookieless future piece for a moment. Obviously, as you mentioned, we're a broadcast channel. We're one to many, which means we are firmly on the cookieless side of things. Always have been, always will be. So I think that's a future proof in itself. But if I'm going to reference the P squared plus C equals 6 book that Justin Gibbons brought out recently, it's the second iteration after P squared plus C equals 5 that he did back in 2020 during COVID. And it was actually all around how using priming with out of home can boost attention by an average of 37%. Just using out of home as a primer, which I think is incredible. But then there's also some Lumen research that was basically simulating a cookieless world. So thinking about awareness and click-through rates. So starting with awareness, if you look at the difference between a cookie world and a cookieless world, priming with out of home actually completely recovers any deficit that you might see from eradicating cookies, which is very, very strong. Very, very strong. And similarly with click-through rates, whilst it wasn't entirely recoverable, the priming with out of home basically took a cookied world from 0.6% CTR to 0.5% when primed with out of home in a cookieless environment, which I just think is incredible. So future-proofs our channel considerably because we can be a powerhouse on bringing back on some of those metrics that might otherwise have declined completely.
Definitely. I guess the negligible shift that you see in CTR, given the fact that as an industry we're moving towards other metrics as forms of like KPIs, right? It's probably not so much of an issue if you lose, 0.1% of a CTR if we're thinking about what we're trying to do in real life, which is kind of, whether it's shifting product or whether it's increasing brand awareness or whether it's driving into store. These other metrics are coming in to support that, and that negligible loss that you just mentioned there when it comes to 0.1% of CTR. The fact that programmatic is kind of bringing these new measurement tools into market just helps us to quantify even further. So it's probably not so much of an issue moving forwards if that does happen.
Yeah, and I think we touched on it before, but measurement is very much a test and learn with digital out of home. we need to trial them and see what the results are like, and then have that kind of experience with it to just see what the best measurement is for programmatic digital out of home. So we're actually on the final question, which is, how are smart marketers integrating digital out of home into their omnichannel strategies, and what is it doing for them? I'm going to go to Shanil first from a DSP point of view.
Yeah, so what we've seen is it's doing lots of them. So the brands that are activating digital out of home as part of Omnichannel are really seeing amazing results. So I think one of the best examples that we've seen at VIOOH so far is the brand campaign with Jeep last year. And that was a 3-month campaign that used digital out of home, it used audio, it used mobile, and it used CTV all in conjunction. So all of the channels that we offered at the time were being used to target around 20 dealerships across the country, drive users into store. We were kind of measuring the amount of people that were going into store. But we were also optimizing on the fly across all of those different channels as well. So it's kind of what we like to call an all bells and whistles campaign. Oh, and there's dynamic creative as well. So, it had basically everything on it. And what we actually found was that in that 3 months while the campaign was live, Jeep managed to shift 50% of their annual sales targets within those dealerships in those 3 months. So what we're seeing there is the fact that digital out of home is having a really good effect, and the fact that digital out of home drove the most efficient cost per visits as well to the dealerships shows the power that digital out of home had when twinned with those other channels. We also work with a major sports brand which is activating across multiple markets. And historically we did their kind of mobile advertising, but now they've started to add digital out of home to it as well and retarget users that have seen a digital out of home ad with pre-roll. And what they're finding is that their view-through rates are like 15% higher than what they had previously, just because we've used that priming that Philippa talked about earlier to drive that upper funnel awareness. And then as we can kind of move down into consideration, we're seeing the effect that it has on the digital metrics as well. So I guess in answer to your question, it's doing a lot for the brands that are kind of adopting it. In terms of how they're integrating it, often it's part of a cross-channel buy. We are activating digital out of home or programmatic home in silo as well, because we can have that data, we can have that measurement, all of those additional pieces that we talked about as having the benefit or the benefits of activating through a DSP or a platform like ours. But how they're integrating it on the whole is kind of as part of that unified plan. Because like we said previously, we've planned and bought in silo because we've had to plan and buy in silo in the past, but consumers don't think like that. So if we now have the technology to be able to have that all in one place, unify the approach to all of it, that's where I think the real power of activating omnichannel comes into play.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the proof's in the results there, and 2 different campaigns with different results.
Yeah, exactly. And with different measurement tools, different KPIs, but still having the same level of success just shows the power of out of home, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Philippa, did you have anything to add?
To be honest, I think you touched on all of the key points there, but in general, I think the smart marketers are the ones who really understood the difference between digital out of home versus other channels. And they've taken into consideration the different functionality, the different capabilities, and they are applying that. They understand that different results come from different channels. Digital out of home can reach more top of funnel results, whereas your mobile can reach down funnel in those conversion rates. So I think the smartest people are the ones who really understand that, take it into consideration and plan accordingly to make sure that their media spend is used wisely. And ultimately they're doing the best for the brands that they possibly can. So I'm not going to reference a specific case study in this instance, because I think the Jeep one just shone through there anyway.
All about
exactly. I think it's just about using smart strategy. And I think those are the people that are going to have the most success using our channel in a mix with others, and having that omni-channel capability within a platform like VIOOH, where you can pretty much plan and do everything in one place. This makes it so much easier than having out of home siloed in another location somewhere else. So I think the best is yet to come.
Yeah,
Let's see.
and it's, as we said before, it's a good reach extension or even just a complementary buy out of everything else you're doing. It's just, and then the flexibility of programmatic enables you to manage those budgets throughout a campaign, which is just good. But Patricia, did you have anything to add on to that?
I think for me, it's marketers should look at the difference between operational efficiency. So the ease of access point that we were talking about, you're trying to create a very efficient workflow. That's one thing. And that's a lot about standardizing and making sure that everybody's aligned. But then there's a different point in campaign efficiency
Mhm.
and how you optimize that. And that's where the creativity comes into play. That's where the test and learn comes into play. That's where you're trying to understand, okay, how can I tell I think I've said this many times, my brand story, my message, get them in front. And I think that's the key difference that we should look at and understand.
Yeah, that's the point that everyone needs to remember
Yeah.
throughout the whole planning. What is the goal of the campaign? Like,
Exactly.
Yeah.
the brand
Yeah.
chasing, what do you want the end result to be?
And also there's a difference between, or maybe not a difference, but it's linked, but two different things. Business objectives and media objectives, right?
Mhm.
What is the business objective for that specific advertiser, and what's the media objective or KPI that will drive that ultimately? So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Brilliant, thanks guys. So that's all of our questions. So I'll move over to the Q&A. We have only got one question though, so if anyone does have any more, please throw them in now. This one's actually going to be for you, Shanil. Is there any cost benefit to planning an omnichannel campaign with just one DSP?
Yes, absolutely. The fact that you can have all of that data sitting in one place and be able to optimize across everything and kind of manage frequency, manage efficiency within those different channels. We talked about the need to kind of think about those channels as separate. But we have tools within our platform that allow us to cap frequency and reach, for example, across digital audio and mobile, for example. And we can start to bring those elements into other channels that we operate as well. So there's definitely a cost benefit to doing it that way. The fact that you can have a single source of data applied across all of the different channels that you operate is also really, really key, because you're not then reaching the same users multiple times using multiple different data sets. And also the ability to measure the campaign itself through a platform like ours in real time, have a look at what effects each channel is having and optimize fluidly across all of those. That wouldn't be possible if it was being done in multiple DSPs. Well, it would be possible, but it wouldn't be potentially using the same technologies. You might be able to look at, again, I kind of talked about the denominators across each of those channels. You might be able to look at CTR on display versus VOD, for example, but you wouldn't be able to look at how awareness is shifting as a result of out of home with mobile, with audio, as opposed to one of those channels working in silo. I think having access to all of that information in one place, being able to optimize in real time and being able to use that plan using the same data and being consistent throughout is what brings that cost benefit into play of activating through one platform.
And I think that's the foundation of programmatic, isn't it?
Absolutely,
It's
absolutely.
where it all started and why programmatic was introduced to the market and how much, what percentage of advertising is being bought programmatically over direct now, because you can have it all in one place and
Exactly.
reporting and as you said, optimization. We have another question. Are there any creative considerations to think about when planning an omnichannel campaign? Should all the creatives be the same or different for each channel? And I think this probably goes back to us, talking about the different metrics that you should be looking at for every channel, and then that probably does reflect well in the creative.
Yes.
I can take it from a sort of very out of home skew, I guess. But different channels work very differently in terms of how a user sees and perceives a creative in general. You think on a large screen as you're walking past, you want something very short and snappy that's going to grab your attention. Really short messaging. You don't want an essay on a screen that might change in a few seconds and you go, oh, I was only halfway through that. So you've got to be very concise and to the point with out of home and have very powerful visuals to get that message across in quite a short space of time. Whereas on display or on mobile, you might have a little bit more time to get more interaction with the user, especially because you actually want them to click. So there's an introduction of maybe having a button on there or something that actually calls them to go into that brand's website or something. So the messaging and the overall visual should be very, very consistent, I think, across the board, across different channels. But the actual style of the creative maybe should be slightly different, because you don't want an essay on an out of home, but then equally you don't want a tiny little banner appearing somewhere on out of home. It's not going to resonate with the users very well. So I think it's about creating a consistent message, but using the different channels to your advantage, and just remembering that what frame of mind the user is going to be in when they see that ad. How are they going to feel when they see a TV ad? How are they going to feel when they're listening to a radio ad? And then how are they going to feel when they're walking past a digital out-of-home screen?
Yeah, and think about it from the consumer's point of view. If you're a consumer buying that product, what would you want to see?
Yeah.
I think that's a really, really key point. I think the fact that there needs to be some sort of synergy between all of the creatives in the look and the feel and the tone of the ads. But the nuances between them will differ because, like Philippa said, you might want to add a CTA onto your mobile campaign, for example, whereas on digital out of home, that just might not be necessary. I think on the whole, the key thing to note is that attention spans are short and they're getting shorter. So try and get the message across as quickly as you can. And then have separate frames after that with additional information if needed, but get the brand message out there as quickly as you can. Obviously, you know, with regards to audio, it's a very, very different channel. It's not a visual channel. It's more of a kind of, well, it is audio, right? So the way that creative plays out on audio needs to be a little bit different. But we work with brands to help them see that. So we have an amazing creative studio. I really can't sing their praises enough, who basically can help brands and consult with brands as to what their omnichannel creatives should look like. We also often build those free of charge a lot of times as well. So if you are thinking about running an omnichannel campaign and you're thinking, oh, creative might be a little bit of a barrier to entry because I don't want to build out multiple creatives across all of these different channels. I think that our studio basically eliminates those barriers to entry because it means that brands can start to build across various channels using the hero assets that they have. But our studio will tweak those and our audio production company will help with that as well. So like Philippa said, it's about having that kind of brand message, that brand synergy and having that resonance as to right, that's brand X, but then also leaving enough space for them to tailor the creative for the screen on which it's going to appear on. Because when we first launched into the UK market, it was kind of at the time that mobile was really rising to prominence, and a lot of the creatives that we were playing out were truncated desktop ads, right? So they were desktop ads that we've been provided, which, you know, perform very, very differently on a mobile screen. And we're almost seeing that again with the advent of omnichannel. We almost need to take a step back and go, right, these screens need to have these specific specs, and this is the way to build a successful creative on this screen. And that's what we like to think that we can help brands with through our creative studio.
Yeah, I think it's key here from, you know, going back to the education piece, saying not to make assumptions.
Yes.
If there is something you're unsure about, then ask. Like, we're happy to help boys from a view point of view, from JCDecaux and from Hawke's point of view. You know, and we want to help ease the process in planning. So yeah, don't make assumptions and just always ask. No, you know, in an emerging channel and new channel, no question is a silly question.
Yeah, and we don't have all the answers either. So we often collaborate with you guys, right? To say what's the best way that we should play out this creative. So by no means are we saying that we've completely nailed digital out of home creative. Like, we like to think that we're a long way down the road from where we were 4 years ago. But by these sorts of conversations and working collaboratively with yourselves, that's the way we're all going to be able to work together to actually play out successful creatives. And like Patricia was saying earlier, at the end of the day, what do we want to do? We want the end user to see a creative that is actually, you know, fit the screen and kind of relevant to them, right? And as long as we can do that through working together, then I think we're going to see more successful campaigns.
Paramount.
Absolutely.
Okay, that was all of our questions. But this has been very insightful, and I think we'll be sending out a follow-up email with some information on the points everyone's touched on. But thanks everyone for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining.